In here, you have to look at again when we look at the scriptures and we see certain things about the scriptures, and sometimes it's going to talk about certain things, and you look at it and say, okay, well that doesn't deal with us today because we don't have this issue, but it deals in a different type of way, okay? And sometimes you might laugh when you hear what I'm going to say, but in verses 5 through 9, it says, slaves, obey your human masters with fear and trembling in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ. Don't work only while being watched in order to please men, but as slaves of Christ, do God's will from your heart. Serve with a good attitude as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good each one does, slave or free, he will receive this back from the Lord. And masters, treat your slaves the same way without threatening them, because you know that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So when you look at this, you say, okay, so why in the world, God, are you going to have Paul write to this church about slavery, and how in the world does that affect us today? Because when we think of slavery, we think of the fact of a person owning another person, okay? And then they're the master and we're the slave. But when you start looking at this and you start understanding this, it's more of a relationship between a worker and the boss, the owner. And it's talking, and again, it's talking from a Christian perspective. So what we're going to talk about is, as a worker in a job, sometimes, I don't know how many of you, if you've worked out in the environment and you start talking to people and they claim to be Christians, and then you start looking at their work ethics, and you're sitting there and you're saying, God, please, don't ever let them tell anybody ever again that they're a Christian. And because when I tell people in the work environment that I'm a Christian, they're going to think of me in relationship to them. And we don't want to go there. And so what Paul, Paul was talking about, and if you remember, he also wrote the letter to Philemon, okay, about Onesimus, who was a slave who had ran away from Philemon, and Paul, he met Paul, and he became a Christian. And Paul said, you need to go back to your master, Philemon, and here I'm going to write a letter back to him for you, okay? And so when you think about it, in the period that they're talking about in the Roman Empire, there were slaves. There definitely were, okay? As a matter of fact, sometimes you would find, if you, I had the privilege that when I went to Rome to actually go to the Colosseum. And in the Colosseum was where they would bring in the Christians from in the Roman Empire, and they would have them run. What they would do is they had the catacombs in here, and then they had the Colosseum where it became a game. That what they would do is they would let the Christians out into the arena from one end, and they would let the lions out of the arena from the other end. And the lions would be coming this way, and the Christians were going this way. And the only way that a Christian would win is if they got to the other end, or the lion didn't kill them. Well, the unfortunate part about it, it was a rat. It looked like a rat maze, in there. And stuff, and you basically, it was dirt, okay, and so it really wasn't a good way to climb over the top of it, and so you begin to see that type of slavery that went on. That was bad. They were there for the entertainment of the Roman people, Okay, and they looked down upon them. Other types of slavery wasn't always so bad. Philemon and Onesimus was part of it, and stuff. And so, and what happened is when people sometimes they read this part and they read a part about slavery, slaves and masters, what they want to do is read into it that Paul is making a stand about slavery. Well, if you really look at it in here, Paul doesn't really say anything about the aspect of slavery being good or bad. He just basically says that, knowing that whatever good each one does, slave or free, he'll receive this back from the Lord. And so he wasn't saying that, okay, you guys as masters are really evil people because you own slaves. And he doesn't get into, talking about this issue. And what Paul was beginning to talk about really was people who were Christians who found themselves as masters or slaves. Okay? And so let's look at it from the perspective today of being a manager, boss, owner who supposedly says they're a Christian, and a worker who basically, I'm sorry, but you're there at the will of the boss or the owner or the manager or whoever it is. They control your destiny. They can hire you, they can fire you. They can give you raises, no raises. It's a, this. And so let's look at it, from this perspective. And so let's look at it starting in verse number 5. Okay, and let's talk about coming from the employee's responsibility as a Christian. He says, slaves, obey your human masters with fear and trembling in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ. And so think about this for a minute. If I'm a Christian and it says that I am to submit in sincerity, okay, with fear and trembling as to Christ, what does that mean? To submit to Him in fear and trembling. Respect, and respect in what way? If I'm looking at it from an employee perspective, then who's the employer? If I'm looking at it as a Christian perspective. God or Christ. Who is our authority? Christ. Yeah. And this is what he's saying. Slaves, obey your human masters with fear and trembling in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ. So if I'm a Christian, then my authority, the person that I submit to, is Christ or God. And when he talks about fear and trembling, it isn't to a point of being afraid. It's a point of respect and an understanding that he is in authority. He is the one that is giving the instructions. If you remember when we were talking about in the relationship of the family, the father is the one who does the instruction. The mother is the one that does the teaching. Okay? In the church, we come back to that perspective. In the church, who gives the instructions? Is God, remember? God gives the instructions through His Word. And so who does the teaching? The church is the mother. And so the church as a mother is the one that takes the instructions of God and does the teaching to the children, of breaking it down. What is he saying? What's he meaning? And so now when he starts talking about, okay, so now you're an employee. And think about it. We are an employee to God. He is going to pay us. He is going to reward us. Remember when Jesus gave the illustration of the master had a vineyard. And he was going to go away. And so what he did was he took some of his employees and said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 5 talents, you 2, and you 1. And in doing this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go away, but I'm going to come back. And when I come back, I'm going to see what kind of job you did in watching over my vineyard, and I'm going to pay you accordingly. The one who had 5, doubled. The one who had 2, doubled. The one that only had 1, didn't do anything with it. He took that away. Okay, he took away the reward aspect of it and gave that reward to someone else. This is the same perspective as an employee that I have as a Christian to Christ, to God. And so what he starts talking about is that I need to submit to his authority. You've got Christians, and I'm sure you've run into these people who say, I can do anything I want. But they'll tell you that, right? So let me ask you this question. If you are hired to do a job, okay, let's say you work at Myers in the deli. Okay, so you cut the meat, right? Yeah. Okay, so you cut the meat. And so you decide, you know what, today when I come in, I'm not going to do deli work. I'm going to go over to the produce. And the boss comes up and says, hey, Bob, what are you doing with the bananas? Why aren't you over, in the deli? Well, I really thought I'd take a break today. And I really don't want to work in the deli. I want to work over here in the produce. And by the way, tomorrow, I just want to go over here and this is Myers. So I'm going to go over and work in the furniture stuff. How long do you think you're going to work there? No. Yeah. And you may say, well, you know what? You don't understand, boss. I clocked in, and I am working. I'm just doing what I want to do. And I expect you to pay me the same salary, by the way, when I clock out. And when my time card shows up and you start to do payroll, you need to know that I was here every day and I was working. I just wasn't working in the deli. I was working where I wanted to work. And pretty soon you're going to find out. You may have been clocking in and you may have been doing what you want to do, but you ain't going to get paid very long for doing that kind of stuff. And so when he starts talking about, as Christians, as employees, what we need to do is understand, do we do this with God? I mean, we try it, probably, but as far as getting paid, we expect to get the same payment in doing what I want to do and not doing what he wants me to do? And by the way, I submit to you that you're not on your time clock. You're on his time clock. When you get up in the morning and you're checking in with him, he's got the time. When you go to sleep at night, he's got the time. You are checking in and checking out. And he's saying that you need to do this. So if I'm to submit to that, now here's the other aspect of it. You have a boss at Myers, right? You have a person that's in charge of the deli. Okay, and that person, I don't know if they come in the morning and tell you here's what I need you to do. Do they?
No.
No.
They know what I need to do.
They know what you.
Know
what you need to do.
I know what's expected of me.
And what is expected is that, hey, when someone walks up here, you need to wait on them. You don't need to be sitting back here pity-patting, talking on your phone, or doing any of this other stuff. If a customer walks up here, you need to come up there with a smile and say, hey, may I help you, ma'am, or sir? What is it that you how can I help you? What would you like? You can't just walk up to them and say, hey, dude, what's happening? You want some meat? They got better meat over here at Kroger right across the street.
This is what not to do it.
You're not going to last very long. If the boss is sitting there and the boss tells you, hey, here's the stuff we got on sale this week or today. So hey, if somebody comes up and they want bologna, you may want to push this, right?
Yeah.
They do this?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. See, I know the business.
Like going through a drive-through at a restaurant, they always try to sell you something.
You always want to upsell.
Yeah.
And so they'll tell you, hey, you need to try to upsell. Now, if they're sitting there watching you, and all day long you never tried to upsell anything, they're probably going to talk to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's the same thing with God. God's not trying to tell us to upsell, but God has the authority to say, hey, and by the way, here's what he told us to do. Remember Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 through 20? Go make disciples. And you're going to hear me, I'm sorry, you're going to get tired of hearing me say this, but I'm going to keep repeating it because I believe this is where we are failing. Because we have decided not to listen to authority. That was a command that he gave us. And this is why you're going to hear me pushing more and more and more. Get out, tell people about Jesus. Get out, tell people about Jesus. Because the more and more that I look at this and the more and more I study this, the more and more that I have come to the realization that that is the authority of God speaking to us, giving us a command, and we have no option. We can offer up every excuse that we want to, and ladies and gentlemen, it ain't flying. We are, and let me not chase a rabbit, but let me go down a little bit deeper in this thought, okay? When you start looking, I hear people all the time talking about what's wrong with this world. Every day you pick up and it's just like some major catastrophe. And everybody is saying, how did they miss this? Or how could someone do this? And may I say this to you? I believe that the whole answer to this is very simple. It doesn't take rocket science to explain exactly what's wrong. When God created Adam and Eve, he created a foundation. Okay? And again, the foundation was, if you go back and look, as we've been explaining, was that God gave commands to Adam. Here is the teaching. And now you need to, Adam, bring this down to Eve. Again, Cain and Abel, they did sacrifices. Okay? Cain's wasn't right, but he was still doing it. So where did he get that instruction? From Adam. Funneled down, okay? And I'm not please understand this, I am not belittling women because they have a very, very important role in all of this. as well as the man, because it is coming from the perspective, for those of you that have been here, as also looking at Jesus Christ as the groom or the father, and the church being the mother or also the bride. Okay? And when you look at how Christ treats the church, the bride, if the husband would treat his wife that way and do that aspect in the family, there wouldn't be an issue. And if the church, which is the bride, how many times do you believe that you as a church, or we as the church, can go to Christ and say, you know what? I want to do my own thing. I do not want to be under your authority. As a matter of fact, I believe in church liberation. And we go and we let the world. And so what happened with the kids? The kids are losing the foundation. The kids are basically raising themselves. Video games. And like they're talking, they keep saying the guns are the problem. Guns aren't the problem. Guns don't kill people. The people who shoot the guns kill people. Okay? And what's happened is kids are playing these video games which are violent. And they have become so prone or so dead to death and blood. It's like a video game. I mean, honestly, you think about it. Who in their right mind would take an AR-15 and which holds a 30-round clip and have 10 more clips and shoot 300 bullets out of there in a matter of 3 minutes. 3 minutes or 10 minutes. It was the time frame that he did it. Okay? And they said, well, we saw all the signs. Okay, yeah, they saw all the signs, but nobody did anything. And sometimes you got to think. For instance, we have basically gotten rid of mental hospitals because you don't want to do this, okay? Or, remember when you and I went to school? There were kids, and their mental capacity was not the same, okay? That doesn't mean they're bad people. But what do? They want to try to mainstream them into the schools now. And I understand they want to help them fit into society. But the problem is the mental capacity is not at the same learning level. All of us don't learn at the same level. And if you sit there and try to put a person who can't read and put them with someone who can read, then guess what happens? They get frustrated. And guess what happens? The people who can read, what's wrong with Johnny? Why can't Johnny keep up? And the bullying starts. And that child can't handle the bullying. And where is a lot of this capacity and talking coming from? From the homes, from the parents. As we watched the Grace Card Friday night with the white patrolman, a black individual killed his son. For 17 years, he was so racially motivated that every time, and if you know anything about Memphis, Memphis is a predominantly black community. And a white police officer who has a very racist opinion of every black person that they see, they won't kill him. Especially if one killed your son. And so today, you think about it, You can't, I don't think you can pick up a newspaper or watch a news program without news coming across that a policeman's been shot. They come into these, remember the riots that was out in California on the campuses with the police and the Black Lives Matter movement and all of this that were basically, wasn't racially motivated, but they were basically checking to make sure. No. But basically they were saying things like pigs in a blanket and talking about killing the pigs. This is straight from the 60s. You know, and so now we're getting kids that are doing the same thing that was happening in the 60s. And so there's no respect for authority. Kids in school. Hey, and Diana and I were talking about it. I'll tell you what, if I got detention in school, my parents knew about it. Why weren't you at home? Why are you so late? Well, no. They called and you had detention today. Now I got flat out in trouble for it. Today it's a joke. You have in-school suspensions. Kids spit on teachers. They curse teachers. And sometimes they say, okay, well, we're going to suspend you. That's what they want.
That's exactly right.
I can sit at home and play my video games while mom and dad's working. Ain't nobody here to watch me. And so, to me, what we've lost is exactly what he's talking about here, and that is respect for authority. We have lost respect from authority from the child all the way up to the parent. And may I say this, children do not learn to disrespect authority on their own.
It starts at home.
They're learning it from adults, or they're learning it from what we're letting them watch on TV or video games.
My daughter-in-law says it is unreal when they have to bring a parent,
Oh.
how the parents act.
Yeah. It's like, you've got to be kidding. My Johnny, my Susie?
Yeah.
No way. They're good kids. The problem is your style of teaching. It isn't my child, it's you all.
Put the blame on somebody else.
Yeah, because they don't want to take responsibility. And this is what he's talking about, that as an employer, employee, as a Christian, we have to start taking responsibility for our actions. Flip Wilson's "the devil made me do it" ain't gonna work. You know, when you're sitting there saying,
Heard that forever. I like this Geraldine.
you know, when he's sitting there saying, "Here come the judge, here come the judge," you know, the judge is coming, and we don't realize it. Let me give you something to think about. How long do you think it's going to take Jesus to judge us? All of the Christians.
Maybe a minute.
Huh?
He already knows it all.
Huh?
He knows everything.
Yeah, but we go through a judgment phase. Okay? And we're going to get rewarded. How long do you think it's going to take?
Not long.
How about 7 years?
Wow.
During the period of tribulation. So that at the end of the period of tribulation, in the millennial reign, when we're reigning with Christ, we have our authority of reigning on this earth. In the Jerusalem and in that area. and then afterwards. But think about it. I know we sometimes want to think, oh, it's going to be over with. No. He's going to sit there, and you think about it just for a minute. Let's take someone by the name of Billy Graham. Okay, how many souls did he reach in the Crusades? You know, I believe, I remember it was a couple million. It wasn't as much as sometimes you would think. Okay, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. Because every one of them went out, and you know, let's say 20 to 30% of them, you know, or even 10%, just 10% went out. And they made disciples, and then they made disciples, and they made disciples, and they made disciples. How many is he going to be able to stand near? And as Billy Graham is being judged, God says, I want to show you something. See this sea right here? These were all because of your faithfulness. And you're going to look and you're going to see masses of people. We got plenty of time for him to sit there and say, okay, here's this one. And so let's now take that one and let's talk about his accolades and his rewards or her rewards. Now let's take the next one. And you just watch this pyramid just growing. And God says, after about 2 months, okay, we're done, Billy. We're done, son. Now let's move to the next one. And the next one. Now some people, it's not going to be long. Some were it's a deathbed confession. Some was people that actually did get saved but never really did anything. But they really did get saved. But the problem was their faith never grew.
Chuck, I've got Facebook and I've got Billy Graham on my Facebook. And if I understood it correctly, he's turning 99.
Yes.
And like I said, if I understood it correctly, he is wanting to preach the closest Sunday to his 99th birthday.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that he's able to. I think they keep him very guarded because I think he's got, or did he say his mind is still sharp? I can't remember.
They say that Franklin recently said his mind was still sharp,
Yeah.
but I think there's just other things.
You know, a lot of physical aspects.
Well, I hope he gets to
Yeah,
preach.
because they were talking about him and Queen Elizabeth II are both getting close to 100 years of age, both of them.
I want to see him reach 100.
Yeah, and so it's amazing. But anyway, so if we as Christians begin to understand the authority that we should respect and honor and obey in Christ, we begin to set the example, okay? And this also comes into the point of the attitude of the employee. So when you look at verse number 5 there, it says, in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ. And that is this. As a Christian, I'm going to tell you, there are some bosses that you're going to work for. Man, you would think that the devil has inherited that person or inhabited that person. It just seems like there is nothing that you can do that would ever please that person. And then when they find out that you're a Christian, it's like doubly worse. I mean, it's like, don't you dare say anything. You've got a Bible on your desk, get it off of there. You've got a pen, or you say, hey, have a blessed day, or God bless you, or any of this. They'll tell you flat out. I worked for a guy when I was working for the first time at was it the first time? No, it wasn't. It was about the last time I worked at Cincinnati Bell. And this guy used to work for the post office, okay? And then he got out of the post office and was working for Cincinnati Bell. And he did not like contractors. Good reason was he didn't make much money. We did. But he didn't realize we didn't make any more money than he did. The companies made the money. You know, sometimes we got paid maybe 20% of whatever they were charging. You know, and when you're sitting there charging, $150 an hour or whatever, we never saw the $150 an hour. They had a really high overhead, man. It's amazing. But so anyway, he didn't like us. And I mean, honestly, they had us in a room, 3 of us. And we were working in there, and we had everything that we had to do to not back up into each other. Our work hours were 8 to 4:30. He would be in there at 10 to 8, making sure you showed up. And if you showed up late, oh man, he was chewing you out. He would come in at 4:15, making sure you never left until 4:30. And basically, his comment to us was this: you all are contractors or pond scum. You are the lowest of lowest.
Nice fella.
Yeah. And you'd have to work with this guy every day. He was the guy that gave us our assignments. He was the guy that gave us our evaluations.
We actually called people.
Oh, yes. oh, yes. And I finally, a Christian, but man, I just couldn't take it anymore. And so I went back to my company and said, you got to find me another job, man. I can't work in this environment. It's too hostile, and stuff. And they did. But sometimes it's very, very hard, as an employee to be respectful, but that's what you're supposed to do. If you go back and read 1 Samuel, the whole chapter, 1 Samuel chapter 24, David was a good example of an employee that was respectful to authority. Remember, he had been anointed as the king, and he was the shepherd. And then he became the commander of Saul's army because of his, when he was able to destroy Goliath. But yet Samuel hated him. Saul. Yeah, I'm sorry. David hated, or Saul hated David. Because they would be marching through the streets after a war or after a conflict. Saul would be out there in front on his horse. And David, who was the commander, would be behind him. And the crowds weren't yelling for Saul. They were yelling for David. And, and it said, the words were, hey, Saul, you killed 100 of, people. But David, he's killed thousands. And the jealousy and the rage that built up in Saul's soul against David. And David was his employee. And his wife, Pharaoh's wife, lied about Joseph. And Joseph gets thrown into prison. He's gone from slavery to Pharaoh's house as a slave. And now he's thrown into prison because of a lie. And then he comes back out into Pharaoh's house where Pharaoh had thrown him in prison and had put him in there with what was it, the baker and the butcher. You know? And I think what was it? Didn't he kill the butcher? And I think the baker lived. But somehow, and so he's telling him, he's saying, you know, Joseph, you got to be sincere. Think how hard that is. And then you come down to verse number 7, and it says, serve with a good attitude as to the Lord and not to men. Man alive. What are we to do? You know, you look at that boss and you're saying, he is not Christ. Lord, I know this is what you're trying to tell me, but this is the wrong Lord. This person is a devil. But yet you're asking me to serve them with a good attitude? I mean, honestly, think about it sometimes. I can, you know, I'll share a story that I had, and I think I've shared this with you, that I was working for Champion Paper, and I started working with them in 1980, and was working with them to 1983 in one aspect of the company, and then they were doing a conversion, and they were looking for people, and so I got moved from one side over to the other, and was working there from 1983 to 86. We were doing some conversions and stuff, and part of it, the reason that I got moved over there was because I knew the language. There was very few of us that knew this language, and so I got moved over there because this was one of the languages that I learned and worked on from the other aspect of the company that I was in. And we were doing this conversion and everything and moving it over to another platform. And so I basically was in charge of what they called a material accounting system. And what it was that a customer would order X amount of paper, a certain weight, and then also a certain color. If it wasn't white, it could be something else. And you had a formula on that paper. And so if this was a 20-pound white paper like you generally do with your copiers, okay, there was X amount of pulp that generally went into there. There was X amount of chemicals that would go in there and everything else. And so here's what would happen. They would come off of the machines and they would say, okay, here's how many tons of paper that we made of this. You would extrapolate the formula based on the tonnage for the materials that would have went in for there. And so what they would do is, you knew when they took an inventory at the beginning of the month of all the materials that they had, and then at the end of the month, they had all of the materials that they were left with, and then you had all of your receiving that you had during the month. So you would take that and extrapolate it out and say, here's how much chemicals that you should have used. And so basically, it was, you would extrapolate it out and say, well, here's how much is gone. So you would have to take and run whatever the shortage was across all of the other stuff. So I was in charge of developing the system for them, and getting it going. Well, then they came in and they decided that, okay, now we've done the material accounting system. You know the aspect from the mainframe, and here's the aspect that we're doing in the new platform that we're going to do. You've got it all laid out as to how it should be. You've talked to all of these plant managers, accountants, people that worked on the floor and everything. I mean, I was traveling for basically 18 months all over the country, meeting with all these people and looking at the procedures and how they did it to bring it all into one spot. And then they said, okay, you've done that. Now we're going to the next part. And the next part was what they called a machine performance, and getting readings off the machines to see how well they were up and all of this stuff. And so I was doing this part, and then there was another individual who was taking what I had designed, and he was running with this. The problem was the guy was in a wheelchair. he had gotten out of high school, right out of high school, on a motorcycle, hit a railroad track at the wrong angle, and basically became well, he still had the upper body, but he just lost from the legs down. Okay, so he was in a wheelchair, so he couldn't travel because a lot of these places that we went to was way out in boondoggles, and the airplane, when it would come in, you would have to go down the ramps to there, and it wasn't conducive for him to travel in there. And so they said, okay, so here's what you need to do. You need to make sure that you're in the loop with what he's doing, and then you need to take what they've designed and go back and demonstrate it to these mills. So, okay, so I did that. And then you would be there, I would be there a lot of times for 2 weeks, going through the demonstration and finding out what's right, what's wrong, and bring it back to them and say, here's what needs to be corrected. Or I'd be on the phone with them, talking to them during this period of time, saying, okay, here, this program's not right, this isn't working, here's the things you need to change, okay? Because the formulas aren't doing this and that. Well, then he couldn't install it, so I went to install it for him. Well, as soon as I went to install it, nothing worked. And so I had to work got in there Saturday at noon. I had been up since 4 o'clock Saturday morning, going to the airport. We were still there at 9:30 Saturday night and wasn't allowed to leave. But I had to go check in, and the girl that was with me had to go check in. I went back to the mills. She stayed there. I did not leave that place until Monday morning, when the people got there to relieve me they got there at noon, I think, on Monday. I just left to go get something to eat and take a shower, and was right back on Sunday. And then when everything went south, they blamed it on me and said it was my fault. And then when the guy who was supposed to be doing it was my best friend, was a real good friend of mine, and was sitting next to me, and we had talked and joked and everything for the longest time. Then all of a sudden he wouldn't talk to me anymore. And one day I finally asked him, I said, why won't you talk to me anymore? And he said, because of what you put on my evaluation, I didn't get a raise this year. And I said, join the club, neither did I. I didn't get one either. But I didn't put anything on your review. Oh, well, yeah. They went through my review with me and said, here's what you said. And I said, and I was one that I copied my reviews before I handed them back. And I knew he did too. And I said, do you have a copy of it? And he says, yeah. I said, let me see it. And he showed it to me, and I said, let's go. And I went over to the office, and the girl who was my supervisor was right outside. And I said, I need to talk to you and you, because there's something here that you lied about. And so they said, oh, no, you said it. And no, I did not. I didn't say this. You never asked me anything about him. And you're putting it down there. And so they finally admitted that I didn't say anything. So I went to their boss and said, I need out. I can't work for these people, because I have no respect for someone who's going to lie on you. And it was the hardest thing in the world. I mean, because I became bitter. And they were going through a reorganization. We had bought a company. And so basically, guess who was the first one that was going to be let go? And it just so happened that the guy I worked for before was starting a new department, and he said, no, I'll take him. And he saved me until he couldn't save me anymore in 1990, when I just finally got fed up and said, I'm done with this company. This is the pits. And sometimes it's hard to be a Christian in that type of environment, guys. It really is.
Oh, this is Pastor Chuck Cotton from Calvary Baptist Church.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for taking the time out to either listen to our sermon or to watch it on video. We are grateful that you've actually taken the time and hope and pray that it has been a blessing to you as it was to us as we delivered it to our congregation. We ask if you have any questions whatsoever that you email us at pastorchuck@calvarybaptistmiddletown.org, or you could come in and give us a phone call, if you would please, at area code 513-423-7251. I'd like to take this opportunity to also invite you to come to our church and visit us, if you would please. We actually have small groups on Sunday morning starting at 9:30, with our morning worship following at 10:45. Prior to our morning small groups, we also provide donuts with coffee, milk, orange juice, a time for fellowship, get to know each other, have a good time before we actually break out into our small groups for Sunday. Our worship services are uplifting, they're fast moving, and everything in our service is just a fast pace. But we do take time every once in a while to slow down as we feel the Holy Spirit moving, and we never want to hinder it in any way. We also have on Sunday evening, and during the school year, we have Awana, and Awana starts with the Puggles, actually from age 2 all the way up through high school. And during that period of time, we also have a worship service. Both of these start at 6 o'clock and end at 7:30. Our Wednesday night, we have a Bible study, which starts at 7. We generally finish about 8:15. We would love for you to come and visit with us. Don't have to dress up. Just come as you are, because to us, it doesn't matter. You're a child of God, a creation of His, and so to us, you're important to everything that we do. Our motto here is building the kingdom one life at a time, and we hope that we have a chance to visit with you, get to know you as you get to know us. So thank you, and may God bless you.